At my college graduation, my father stood up during the family dinner and said I was a disappointment who would never amount to anything in the real world, because I chose political science over business. My mother nodded in agreement while my siblings looked away in embarrassment. 8 years later, I walked into the East Wing of the White House as the newly appointed Chief of Staff, and the Secretary of Defense immediately stood and bowed. "Madam Chief of Staff." The look of absolute shock on my family's faces when they saw it on the evening news. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That was the moment I knew every door they'd slammed in my face had led me to the most powerful office in American politics. At my college graduation, my father stood up during the family dinner and said I was a disappointment who would never amount to anything in the real world, because I chose political science over business. My mother nodded in agreement while my siblings looked away in embarrassment. 8 years later, I walked into the East Wing of the White House as the newly appointed Chief of Staff, and the Secretary of Defense immediately stood and bowed. "Madam Chief of Staff." The look of absolute shock on my family's faces when they saw it on the evening news. That was the moment I knew every door they'd slammed in my face had led me to the most powerful office in American politics. My name is Victoria Sterling, and I was born into a family that believed politics was a dirty game for people who couldn't succeed in legitimate business. But that's not the whole story. The first time I mentioned wanting to work in government, I was 14. My father, CEO of Sterling Industries, a Fortune 500 manufacturing company, looked at me like I'd announced plans to join the circus. "Smart girls don't waste their intelligence on bureaucratic nonsense," he said, straightening his gold tie. "Politics is for people who can't create real value in the marketplace." My mother, who'd given up her own career to manage charity boards and social events, nodded emphatically. "Victoria, darling, government work is for people from struggling families. We build empires, we don't serve them." They had my entire future mapped out. MBA from Wharton, like my father, eventually take over the family business, like my older brother Jonathan was groomed to do. Definitely something that would enhance the Sterling legacy and look impressive at country club galas. When neighbors asked about their children, they'd beam discussing Jonathan's business acumen and my younger sister Caroline's fashion design aspirations. But when it came to my interest in public service, they'd quickly redirect the conversation. Outside our mansion, their social circle shared the same disdain for government work. The Ashfords next door, the Blackwells from the yacht club, the Montgomerys who owned half the commercial real estate downtown. They all treated their children's private sector achievements like Olympic medals. High-profit careers meant successful parenting. Government service meant failure to capitalize on privilege. At prep school, I lived a contradiction. I was valedictorian, model UN president, and debate team captain. But at home, none of that mattered when weighed against my obsession with politics. My mother once said to her book club, loud enough for me to hear, "Victoria's brilliant, but she has this peculiar fascination with Washington. We're hoping Harvard Business School will cure her of these idealistic notions." I remember the night I brought home my acceptance letter to Georgetown's School of Foreign Service like it was etched in stone. Full academic scholarship, one of only 20 awarded that year. I was 17, holding what I thought was my golden ticket to everything I'd ever dreamed of. My father barely glanced at it before tossing it aside. "That's nice, sweetheart, but let's discuss real universities." "I've already spoken to the dean at Wharton about your admission." My mother tried a gentler approach. "Darling, you don't understand what you'd be sacrificing. Government salaries are embarrassing. You'll never afford the lifestyle you were raised in. You'll spend your life begging for funding while your prep school classmates are building fortunes." But I saw something different in those government internship brochures. I saw public servants who dedicated their lives to something bigger than profit margins. I saw policy that could change millions of lives. While my family saw bureaucratic limitations, I saw the power to shape history. Caroline tried to be supportive, at least privately. "I think it's cool," she whispered one night when our parents were arguing downstairs about my stubbornness, but even she didn't really understand. "Maybe you could do corporate lobbying. That way you'd still make Dad happy." That's when I realized this wasn't just about career paths. This was about fundamentally different definitions of success and purpose. At Georgetown, I thrived in ways my family couldn't comprehend. While they attended corporate board meetings and charity galas, I was studying international relations, analyzing foreign policy, and interning at think tanks that shaped global strategy. During holiday breaks, I'd return home with stories about briefing senators or attending State Department conferences, only to be met with polite disinterest and barely concealed disappointment. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, already changing the subject to Caroline's latest fashion internship or Jonathan's promotion at Sterling Industries. The contrast became more painful each semester. At Georgetown, I was respected for my analytical mind and policy insights. I graduated summa cum laude, won the Dean's Award for International Affairs, and earned recommendations from professors who'd served in previous administrations. My academic advisors saw potential for significant government service. But at home, none of that translated into recognition. During my sophomore year, Jonathan got engaged to Madison Whitmore, daughter of a prominent banking family. The engagement party was a lavish affair at our country club, with 300 guests celebrating what my parents called a perfect union of successful families. When guests asked about me, my parents would mention I was studying at Georgetown, but never specified my major or accomplishments. When I tried to share stories about my internship at the Council on Foreign Relations, or my research on trade policy, the conversation would quickly shift to Jonathan's latest business deal, or Caroline's acceptance to Parsons School of Design. "Victoria's always been the intellectual one," my father would say with a strained smile. "Very idealistic." The word idealistic became their code for impractical and naive. Caroline was caught in the middle, trying to bridge the growing gap. "Tell them about your policy paper," she'd whisper encouragingly. But when I mentioned my research on economic sanctions or diplomatic strategy, the room would fall silent, and someone would inevitably steer the conversation toward more appropriate topics. I started noticing how they talked about other families with children in government service. When the Hartwell's daughter joined the State Department, my parents would speak about her in pitying tones. "Such a waste," my mother would sigh. "She could have been running her own consulting firm by now." When the ambassador's son visited our social events, they treat him politely but discuss his limited earning potential behind closed doors. Public service wasn't seen as honorable in their world. It was seen as career suicide, a failure to monetize your education and connections. The breaking point came during my junior year. I'd been selected for a prestigious internship with the National Security Council, working directly with senior policy advisors on Middle Eastern affairs. It was an incredible opportunity that could launch my career in foreign policy. When I called home excited to share the news, my father's response was ice cold. "Victoria, we need to have a serious conversation about your future. This government fantasy has gone on long enough. I can still get you into Harvard Business School if you transfer programs next semester." "Dad, this isn't a fantasy. This is my career path." "Your career path?" His voice rose. "Playing politics with taxpayer money while real leaders build industries? Victoria, you're squandering every advantage we've given you." My mother took the phone, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart, we're concerned about you. This obsession with government isn't healthy for someone with your background. Maybe you should speak with Dr. Pemberton." That phrase haunted me. Not, "maybe you should reconsider," or "help us understand your passion." Maybe I should speak with someone. As if my dedication to public service was a psychological disorder that needed professional intervention. That summer at the NSC, surrounded by brilliant policymakers who dedicated their lives to protecting American interests, I felt more at home than I ever had in my family's mansion. These people understood duty, strategy, and the weight of decisions that affected millions of lives. My graduation from Georgetown should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. I finished first in my class, won the prestigious Thornton Prize for International Affairs, and had already secured a position as a junior policy analyst at the State Department. The ceremony was held on a perfect May morning in Washington, D.C., with families from across the country celebrating their children's achievements in one of the nation's most respected programs. My family attended, but their presence felt more like an obligation than celebration. While other parents beamed with pride and took countless photos, mine sat rigidly in their seats. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My father checked his phone throughout the ceremony, occasionally sighing audibly. My mother smiled politely but never applauded. Only Caroline seemed genuinely excited, cheering when my name was called for the Dean's Award. After the ceremony, as families gathered for congratulatory photos and lunch, I watched the Harrison family embrace their daughter, a new Foreign Service officer, with tears of joy. "We're so proud," her mother sobbed. "You're going to represent our country with honor." When I approached my family, my father's first words cut deep. "Well, that's finished. Now you can move on to something that actually matters." "Dad, this isn't finished. This is just the beginning. I start at the State Department next month." My mother stepped forward, touching my arm with false sympathy. "Victoria, you've proven whatever you needed to prove. You can still apply to business school for next fall. Your father has connections at several top MBA programs." That's when I realized they'd never seen my government career as real. To them, Georgetown was an expensive 4-year detour, not preparation for a life of public service. They'd spent my entire education waiting for me to come to my senses and join the family business empire. The real breaking point came that evening, at what should have been my celebration dinner. Instead of congratulating me, my family staged what could only be described as an intervention. My parents had reserved a private dining room at their exclusive club and invited Dr. Patricia Whitman, a family friend and business psychologist who specialized in, quote, redirecting talented individuals toward profitable careers. They'd also insisted Jonathan and Caroline attend. "Victoria," my father began, "we're here because we love you and we're worried about your future." Dr. Whitman leaned forward with practiced concern. "Your family has shared their concerns about your career trajectory. They feel you might be avoiding the private sector because of some underlying fear of competition or success." I looked around the table. Jonathan avoided my eyes, clearly uncomfortable. Caroline looked like she wanted to disappear. My mother was already tearing up. "We think you're running away from your potential," my mother said through her tears. "First to this idealistic school, now to government work that pays nothing. When are you going to stop hiding and take your rightful place in the business world?" "I'm not hiding. I'm serving my country." My father's composure finally cracked. "Serving your country? Victoria, you're wasting a world-class education and family connections while your siblings build real careers. Jonathan just closed a $50 million deal. Caroline's designs are already being featured in Vogue. What do you have to show for 4 years except a diploma in talking?" That's when I understood the full scope of their delusion. They genuinely believed that government service was inferior to private enterprise. They'd brought in a psychologist not to understand me better, but to diagnose what they saw as my broken thinking. Dr. Whitman spoke again. "Victoria, your family worries that you're using government structure to avoid the real challenges of entrepreneurship and wealth creation." I stood up, my hands shaking with rage and disappointment. "The real challenge? You think managing a budget deficit and preventing international conflicts is easier than making money?" The room fell completely silent. For the first time, I'd said out loud what we all knew. I didn't belong here, and maybe I never had. After walking out of that intervention, I didn't speak to my family for 8 months. I threw myself into my work at the State Department's policy planning staff, analyzing emerging threats and drafting strategic recommendations for senior officials. The work was intellectually demanding and deeply meaningful, everything my family said government service could never be, but their words echoed in my mind during quiet moments. Wasting your education, running away from real challenges, avoiding competition. I began documenting everything, not because I planned to prove anything to them, but because I needed evidence that I wasn't delusional. I saved every performance review, every commendation, every memo that made it to the secretary's desk with my name on it. Woiko Konta Pan, my supervisory evaluations were exceptional. Ms. Sterling demonstrates extraordinary analytical capabilities and strategic thinking. Recommend for accelerated advancement. Exceptional talent with unlimited potential for senior leadership. I kept these in a private file, proof that contradicted my family's narrative about my wasted potential. During my rare calls with Caroline, our conversations danced around the elephant in the room. "How's Washington treating you?" she'd ask carefully. "I'm thriving, Caroline." "I really am." "Mom asks about you sometimes. She worries you're lonely." "Does she? Or does she worry that I'm not miserable enough to come crawling back?" The silence always answered that question. I learned through Caroline that my parents had been telling their social circle I was taking time to explore options and would likely return to business school once I got politics out of my system. They'd even kept my childhood bedroom exactly as I'd left it, as if my government career was an extended internship. Jonathan visited me once during a business trip to D.C. We met for dinner at a restaurant near DuPont Circle. He seemed genuinely curious about my work, asking about policy development and international relations. For a moment, I hoped maybe one family member might understand. "The work sounds challenging," he admitted. "But Vic, don't you want more? Financial security, real influence, a chance to build something lasting? This government thing is admirable, but it's not sustainable long term." Even Jonathan, who I'd hoped might be different, saw my career as temporary. A noble experiment to outgrow rather than a calling to embrace. That conversation crystallized something crucial. My family's inability to accept my choices wasn't about concern for my well-being. It was about their own identity. Having a daughter in government service challenged their worldview about success, status, and what constituted a worthwhile life. I began preparing for the possibility that this divide might be permanent. I opened my own investment accounts, completely separate from the family trust fund I'd never touched anyway. I built relationships with mentors in government who became my chosen family, senior officials who understood dedication, public service, and the honor of working for something larger than profit. Deputy Secretary Margaret Chen became particularly important. She'd faced similar family pressure early in her career. "Some families can't see beyond their own limitations," she told me during one of our mentoring sessions. "Your job isn't to make them understand. Your job is to serve with excellence and let your contributions speak for themselves." I started keeping a journal, not about my family's rejection, but about my ambitions. I wanted to make deputy secretary by 30. I wanted to specialize in economic policy and international trade. I wanted to serve in senior positions that would allow me to shape American foreign policy and protect our national interests. For the first time, I was planning a future based entirely on my own goals, not my family's expectations. I was becoming the public servant I'd always dreamed of being, even if it meant becoming a stranger to the people who'd raised me. The woman my family had tried to fix was exactly who I was meant to be. 3 years into my State Department career, I achieved something that changed everything: promotion to senior policy advisor and assignment to the National Security Council. At 26, I was the youngest person ever selected for that position, working directly with the president's senior staff on classified international strategy. The day I received the news, I was in my cramped State Department office, analyzing trade negotiations with China. Deputy Secretary Chen called me into her office, her expression serious, but her eyes bright with pride. "Victoria, you've been selected for immediate assignment to the NSC. Your work on the Pacific Trade Initiative caught the attention of some very important people in the West Wing." She handed me the official orders, and I read them twice before the reality sank in. Senior Policy Advisor to the National Security Council, reporting directly to the National Security Advisor. A dream position that typically required a decade of experience, and I'd earned it in 3 years. For the first time since graduation, I felt the urge to call my family. Surely this would prove that my career wasn't a phase or a mistake. This was validation from the highest levels of American government that I belonged here. I called Caroline first. Her excitement was genuine and infectious. "Victoria, that's incredible. The National Security Council? You're basically working for the president now." "Caroline, do you think Mom and Dad would want to know?" There was a pause. "I think they should know. This is huge, Vic." I called home that evening, my heart pounding as the phone rang. My mother answered, and her voice immediately warmed when she heard mine. "Victoria! Oh, sweetheart, it's so wonderful to hear from you. We've missed you terribly." "Mom, I have news, really good news." Are you finally ready to come home? Have you decided to pursue an MBA? No, Mom, I've been promoted. Senior Policy Advisor to the National Security Council. I'm moving to the White House. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Mom? That's nice, darling. But are you sure this is making you happy? You sound stressed. I wasn't stressed. I was exhilarated. But she heard what she wanted to hear. When my father took the phone, his response was even more crushing. National Security Council? What does that actually translate to in terms of real career advancement? Can you leverage that position into private sector consulting? They couldn't even congratulate me without immediately looking for an exit strategy. That weekend, I walked through the West Wing for the first time as a staff member. Security cleared me through multiple checkpoints, and I felt a profound sense of belonging as I passed the Roosevelt Room and approached the Situation Room, where I'd soon be briefing senior officials on matters of national importance. I called Deputy Secretary Chen, who'd become my closest mentor. Margaret, I think I need to accept that my family will never understand this world. Victoria, some families can't recognize greatness because they're blinded by convention. But your government family sees it. Your colleagues see it. The president's senior staff sees it. That's what matters. She was right. The federal government had become my real family. My colleagues celebrated my achievements without reservation. My supervisors invested in my development because they recognized my potential. The institution itself had embraced me completely. Moving my office to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building felt like coming home. My workspace was small but significant. Steps away from the Oval Office and the corridors of power, where decisions affecting millions of lives were made daily. I sent my family a postcard from the White House gift shop. Working in the West Wing now, finally where I belong. My mother's response came 3 weeks later. We're keeping your room ready for when you're finished playing government. I filed that letter away. There would be no finishing because this was real life. My life. And it was exactly what I'd always known it should be. The call came at 2:30 a.m. on a Thursday. Caroline's voice was panicked, cutting through the secure line from my West Wing office, where I'd been working late on a crisis briefing. Victoria, something's wrong with Dad. He's having severe chest pains and trouble breathing. We're at Presbyterian Hospital. The doctors, they think it might be his heart. I caught the first Amtrak train home, my mind racing between duty and family obligation. Despite everything, he was still my father. I arrived at the hospital still wearing my White House security badge and the Navy suit I'd worn to brief the Secretary of Defense. The cardiac intensive care unit felt like hostile territory. My mother sat slumped in a visitor's chair, her face pale and drawn. Jonathan paced by the windows, his expensive suit wrinkled from the long night. Caroline rushed to hug me, but I could see the others recoil at my government credentials hanging around my neck. How is he? I asked. Stable, but serious, my mother whispered. The cardiologist says he needs emergency surgery. The stress of the last few years. She looked directly at me with accusation in her eyes. This family conflict has been destroying his health. I felt the blame like a physical blow. Somehow, my father's cardiac episode was my fault for pursuing public service. Jonathan stopped pacing. Victoria, we need to discuss this as a family. They led me to a private consultation room where Dr. Harrison, the attending cardiologist, was waiting. He was distinguished, clearly uncomfortable with whatever conversation was about to unfold. Dr. Harrison has been treating Dad for anxiety and stress-related cardiovascular symptoms for 18 months, Jonathan began. The family situation has been a major contributing factor. My mother spoke quietly, dabbing her eyes with tissue. Victoria, your father hasn't slept properly in years worrying about your future. About your safety working in government, your financial security, your isolation from family support. The stress has been enormous. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat awkwardly. I don't typically involve myself in family matters, but Mr. Sterling has repeatedly mentioned his concerns about his daughter's career choices during our sessions. The anxiety has definitely impacted his cardiovascular health. I stared at them, realizing what was happening. They were medicalizing my father's disapproval, transforming his inability to accept my choices into a health crisis for which I was responsible. Are you suggesting that my government service is giving my father heart problems? We're saying, Jonathan replied carefully, That family harmony is crucial for everyone's well-being. Dad's condition is serious, Victoria. Maybe it's time to consider what really matters. The manipulation was breathtaking. They'd weaponized my father's illness to guilt me into abandoning my career. I want to see him, I said firmly. In the cardiac ICU, my father looked smaller than I remembered, connected to monitors and IV drips. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. Victoria, you came. Of course I came, Dad. I've been so worried about you. So scared something would happen to you in Washington and we'd never reconcile. I held his hand, feeling the weight of genuine love, mixed with fundamental misunderstanding. Dad, I'm not in danger. I'm serving my country at the highest levels. But at what cost? His voice was weak but intense. You've lost your family. You're alone. When I'm gone, what will you have? I'll have a legacy of public service. I'll have made a difference in millions of lives. He closed his eyes. I'll never understand you. In the hallway afterward, my mother cornered me with desperate manipulation. The doctor says reducing stress is critical for his recovery. If you could just consider leaving Washington, maybe taking a position with Sterling Industries. Mom, I'm not abandoning my career because Dad can't handle my success. Then you're choosing politics over your father's life. The accusation hung between us like poison. I looked at my family, Jonathan nodding agreement, Caroline torn but silent, my mother's eyes filled with calculated desperation. No, I said finally. I'm choosing authenticity over emotional blackmail. I left the hospital that night knowing I'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. 6 months after my father's heart attack, the warfare against my career became systematic and ruthless. It started with small things I initially dismissed as coincidence. My security clearance renewal faced unusual delays. Questions were raised about my family stability during routine background checks. Then I discovered why. My White House colleague, Deputy Chief of Staff Michael Torres, pulled me aside after a morning briefing with the president. Victoria, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but someone in your family has been making calls. They've contacted the Office of Personnel Management, claiming you've been showing signs of psychological distress. My blood turned to ice. What kind of calls? Someone identifying herself as your mother contacted OPM's security division. She suggested your government position might be compromising your mental health and that your clearance should be reviewed due to emotional instability. I sat in my West Wing office that night, staring at the security forms I'd filled out honestly years ago. Under family support, I'd listed my relatives as neutral. Now they were actively sabotaging my career from within the system. The attacks escalated quickly. Caroline called me sobbing 2 weeks later. Victoria, I'm so sorry. They made me do it. Made you do what? Mom threatened to cut off my tuition if I didn't call your supervisor. She had me tell the Chief of Staff's office that I was worried about your mental state, that you'd been acting erratically during family visits. My hands shook as I ended the call. My own sister had been coerced into filing false reports about my fitness for duty. The next morning, White House Chief of Staff Robert Martinez summoned me to his office. He was a seasoned political operative who'd always supported my advancement, but his expression was troubled. Sterling, I've received some concerning reports about your personal situation. Family members expressing worry about your psychological state, claims that government pressure has made you unstable. Sir, those reports are fabricated. My family disapproves of my career choice and is attempting to force me out of government service. That's a serious accusation, Victoria. Yes, sir, it is. He studied my personnel file, then looked up. Your work has been exemplary. Your performance reviews are outstanding, but these family concerns create complications for your security status. The investigation that followed was humiliating. White House personnel psychologists interviewed me extensively. My personal relationships were scrutinized. My dedication to public service was questioned. All because my family had decided that if they couldn't convince me to leave government, they'd make the government want me to leave. But I wasn't alone. Deputy Secretary Chen connected me with White House counsel Sarah Blake, who specialized in cases involving family interference with government careers. This happens more than you'd think, Blake explained. Families who can't accept their children's public service sometimes try to sabotage their careers. It's psychological warfare disguised as concern. She helped me document everything: the timing of the complaints, the coordination between family members, the contradictions in their claims. We built a case showing clear evidence of malicious interference. Meanwhile, I learned my family had been busy on multiple fronts. My mother had contacted my Georgetown Alumni Association, spreading rumors that I'd suffered a breakdown and was lost in political delusions. Jonathan had reached out to family friends in corporate positions, asking them to monitor my status and mental health. They'd turned my government service into a mental health crisis within their social circle. At country club events and charity dinners, I became the cautionary tale about what happens when privileged children make foolish choices. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd contacted Caroline's boyfriend David, who worked for a major defense contractor, trying to convince him that dating someone in my position was professionally risky. "Ma'am," David told me during a careful phone conversation, "your family reached out suggesting that my association with you might compromise my security clearance. They have no idea what you actually do or how respected you are." That's when I realized this wasn't just about career sabotage anymore. They were systematically trying to destroy my reputation and credibility within every professional community I belonged to. The decision to expose my family's sabotage campaign came after they crossed a line I couldn't ignore. David called me at 6 a.m., his voice tight with controlled anger. "Victoria, your father contacted my security officer at Lockheed Martin. He told them I was involved with an unstable government official who might compromise classified projects. He suggested I was being manipulated by someone with psychological problems." My father had reached into the defense contracting community, one of the most security-conscious sectors in Washington, to try to destroy my relationship and reputation. This wasn't just about my career anymore. He was targeting anyone who supported me. I made an appointment with White House Chief of Staff Robert Martinez. His corner office overlooked the South Lawn, walls lined with photos from 3 decades of political service. But his expression was grave as I explained my situation. "Mr. Martinez, my family is conducting a systematic campaign to end my government career through false accusations and security interference. I have documentation of their coordinated efforts." He reviewed my file, White House counsel Blake's legal analysis, and the timeline of incidents. After 30 minutes of silence, he looked up. "Victoria, what you're describing is an attack on the integrity of our personnel system and national security. This cannot be tolerated." Martinez didn't just believe me. He launched a formal White House investigation. Within days, Secret Service agents were interviewing everyone involved. They discovered a pattern of false reports, coordinated timing, and clear evidence of malicious intent to undermine government operations. The investigation revealed that my family had contacted 12 different federal agencies, 6 security contractors, and multiple personnel in sensitive positions. They'd created an extensive paper trail of fabricated concerns while never once seeking professional help for their supposed worries about my mental health. White House counsel Blake recommended we take the case public to prevent future incidents. "This sets a dangerous precedent," she explained. "If families can sabotage government careers through false reports, it undermines our entire national security apparatus." We contacted James Walsh, a political journalist with Politico, who specialized in White House personnel issues. When I sat across from him in a K Street coffee shop, I felt the weight of ending my family's privacy forever. "This story is bigger than just your family," James said after reviewing our documentation. "This is about the vulnerability of government personnel to domestic psychological warfare." The decision to go public wasn't easy. I spent 5 sleepless nights weighing the consequences. Going public meant burning bridges permanently. It meant admitting to the world that my own family had tried to destroy my career. But it also meant protecting other public servants from similar attacks. The article published on a Monday morning. The headline read, "When Families Wage War on Government Careers, the Hidden Battle for Public Servants' Right to Serve." Within hours, my secure phone exploded with messages. Fellow government officials shared their own stories of family sabotage. Congressional staffers reached out with support. State Department colleagues told similar tales of families trying to force their children out of public service through manufactured crises. One message stood out from NSC colleague Dr. Lisa Park. Victoria, my parents did something similar when I joined the intelligence community. You've given us all permission to speak about this abuse. But the response that mattered most came from Chief of Staff Martinez himself. Victoria, your courage in exposing this vulnerability has protected countless other public servants. This is what leadership looks like. The White House's official response was swift and decisive. New protocols were established for handling family-initiated security concerns. Background investigators received training on identifying coordinated false reporting. My security clearance was not only restored but upgraded for my cooperation in exposing the vulnerability. Mealy. My family's reaction was predictable and devastating. Jonathan left a furious voicemail. You've humiliated our entire family on the national stage. We'll never forgive you for this betrayal. My mother's text was worse. We raised you better than this. You've chosen strangers over your own blood. Caroline's message broke my heart. I understand why you did it, but I don't know if our family can survive this. The Christmas invitation never came. Instead, I received a formal letter from my father's attorney, demanding I cease all contact with family members until further notice. 2 years after going public, my testimony before the Senate Homeland Security Committee changed government personnel policy forever. Sitting at that witness table, facing cameras and senators, I felt the weight of every public servant who'd been silenced by family sabotage. Honorable senators, I began, what happened to me represents a critical vulnerability in our national security infrastructure. When families can weaponize security clearance processes to force out qualified officials, we don't just lose individual careers, we lose institutional knowledge, policy continuity, and operational effectiveness. Senator Bradley leaned forward. Ms. Sterling, how widespread is this problem within the federal government? Since my story became public, over 400 federal employees have contacted me with similar experiences. Family interference with government careers represents a significant and underreported threat to our personnel security. The hearing lasted 6 hours. I presented documented cases, policy recommendations, and testimony from other affected officials. Congressional staff had prepared extensive exhibits showing the scope of the problem across multiple agencies. During a particularly intense exchange, Senator Martinez asked, Ms. Sterling, what would you say to families who genuinely believe government service is harmful to their children? I looked directly into the cameras. I would say that public service is one of the highest callings in American society. When families attack that service, they're not protecting their children. They're attacking the very institutions that protect our democracy. The gallery erupted in applause, and I saw government colleagues wiping away tears. 4 months later, President Chen signed the Federal Personnel Protection Act into law. The legislation created criminal penalties for intentional false reporting against government employees, established independent review processes for family-initiated security concerns, and provided legal protection for public servants facing domestic interference. The signing ceremony was held in the East Room, with hundreds of federal employees in attendance. As President Chen handed me the signing pen, she said, Victoria, your courage has strengthened our democracy and protected thousands of dedicated public servants. But the most meaningful vindication came 6 months later. The President announced my appointment as Deputy Chief of Staff, making me the youngest person ever to hold that position. The appointment required Senate confirmation, which became a platform to discuss the broader issues my case had exposed. During my confirmation hearing, Senator Williams asked, Ms. Sterling, how do you respond to critics who say your family situation makes you unsuitable for senior government service? Senator, I would argue that my experience makes me uniquely qualified to understand the challenges facing public servants and the importance of protecting the integrity of our personnel systems. The confirmation vote was unanimous. The promotion ceremony was held in the Roosevelt Room, with Chief of Staff Martinez presiding. As he administered the oath of office, he spoke words that healed years of family rejection. Victoria Sterling, your dedication to public service in the face of unprecedented personal adversity exemplifies the highest ideals of American government. The audience included senior White House staff, cabinet secretaries, and congressional leaders who'd worked on the legislation. But the person who mattered most was David, now my fiancé, standing in his best suit with tears of pride in his eyes. After the ceremony, a young policy analyst approached me nervously. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. My parents tried to get me fired from the Treasury Department last year using the same tactics your family used. Because of your case and the new protections, the security office immediately recognized their false reports. That evening, David and I celebrated at our favorite restaurant in Georgetown. Over dinner, he handed me an envelope that had been delivered to the White House. This came through official channels today. Inside was a letter from Caroline, written on Johns Hopkins Medical Center letterhead where she now worked as a physician. Victoria, I've spent 3 years in medical training learning about family systems and psychological manipulation, and I finally understand what our parents did to you was abusive. Systematically abusive. They tried to destroy your career because they couldn't control your choices. I was complicit in that abuse, and I'm deeply ashamed. Medical school taught me about service, real service to something greater than yourself. You were serving our country while we were serving our own egos. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm proud of who you became despite us, not because of us. I hope someday I can earn the right to be your sister again. I read the letter twice, emotions flooding through me that I'd kept buried for years. Anger, hurt, hope, and something that might have been the beginning of healing. The next week brought even more unexpected news. The Washington Post called with an unusual request. They wanted to feature me in their Women Who Changed Washington series, highlighting my role in transforming government personnel security. During the interview, the journalist asked, "Do you regret exposing your family's actions?" I thought carefully before answering. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they couldn't see public service as honorable. But I don't regret protecting other government employees from the same abuse. Sometimes serving your country means choosing your values over your comfort. 5 years later, I stood in the Oval Office as President Chen announced my appointment as White House Chief of Staff. The ceremony was attended by cabinet secretaries, congressional leaders, and senior government officials from across Washington. David stood beside me, our 2-year-old daughter Grace sleeping peacefully in his arms, wearing a tiny outfit that read, "Future Public Servant." Victoria Sterling, the president said, has demonstrated that public service isn't just a career, it's a calling that requires courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to something greater than ourselves. As she administered the oath, I felt the weight of history and responsibility. At 33, I was the youngest chief of staff in modern history, responsible for managing the executive office of the president and serving as the primary gatekeeper to the most powerful office in the world. The moment that mattered most came after the ceremony. Secretary of Defense General Harrison approached me with formal military bearing. In front of the assembled crowd, cameras, and my family watching on television, he stood at attention and bowed deeply. "Madam Chief of Staff," he said with unmistakable respect. Later that evening, as news coverage played across every major network, my secure phone rang. It was Caroline, calling from the emergency room where she was finishing her residency. "Victoria, I just saw the ceremony on the break room television." Every doctor, nurse, and patient stopped what they were doing to watch. When the Secretary of Defense bowed to you, this elderly veteran in the waiting room stood up and saluted the screen. Her voice broke with emotion. "I finally understand what you were fighting for all those years. It wasn't just a job, it was about serving something bigger than yourself." We talked for 2 hours, sharing stories about our careers, our dreams, and carefully rebuilding something that had been broken for so long. She told me about her work in trauma surgery, how she'd started volunteering at a veterans hospital. "Working with wounded veterans taught me what real honor looks like," she admitted. "I wanted to understand the community I'd helped our family hurt. I'm sorry it took me so long to see your greatness." My parents hadn't attended any public events since my story broke. According to Caroline, they'd become increasingly isolated, clinging to their old prejudices while their children moved forward into lives they couldn't understand. Jonathan had eventually reached out through Caroline to apologize, admitting that my government success had forced him to question everything he'd believed about public versus private achievement. 6 months after my appointment as Chief of Staff, I received news that would define the rest of my legacy. The President asked me to establish the National Public Service Institute, a new organization dedicated to attracting and protecting the next generation of government leaders. The Institute's mission statement, which I wrote personally, read, "Public service is not a backup plan for those who can't succeed in the private sector. It is the highest calling for those who choose to dedicate their lives to something greater than personal profit." Our first initiative was a scholarship program for students from families who opposed government careers. We provided not just financial support, but family mediation services and protection from the kind of sabotage I'd experienced. The program's success was remarkable. Within 3 years, we'd helped over 1,000 young people pursue government careers despite family opposition. Many became the first in their families to choose public service. The moment that healed my deepest wounds came at our second annual National Public Service Awards ceremony. As I stood at the podium in the Kennedy Center, recognizing outstanding government employees, I saw movement in the back of the auditorium. My parents had quietly entered and taken seats in the last row. After the ceremony, they approached hesitantly. My father, now gray and smaller than I remembered, spoke first. "Victoria, we've spent 5 years watching your career from a distance. We were wrong. About everything." My mother's eyes were filled with tears. "We thought we were protecting you from a lesser life. We didn't understand we were trying to prevent you from greatness." I looked at them, these people who'd raised me but hadn't truly known me, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the possibility of forgiveness. "I hope," my father continued, "that someday you might let us try to be the parents you deserved all along." That night, David and I walked through Lafayette Square with Grace, past the White House where I worked every day to make our country stronger and more just. Looking up at the illuminated building, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. "Do you ever regret choosing this path?" David asked, the same question he'd posed years earlier. I looked at the White House, then at our daughter sleeping peacefully against my chest. "I didn't choose this path despite my family's rejection," I said finally. "I chose it because I believe some callings are worth any sacrifice. The legacy I'm most proud of isn't my position or achievements. It's the thousands of public servants who found the courage to serve authentically because someone finally showed them they didn't have to choose between family approval and national service. Sometimes changing the world means accepting that not everyone will follow you into the light. But someone has to lead the way." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.